chairman of the Antwerp citizen movement StRaten-generaal. And as I was saying, we've been involved in Antwerp in a huge citizen movement. But first, I want to talk to you about problems in democracy. This slide I want to show you to illustrate that the last couple of years, last 30 years, there has been a downward movement as to people's belief into democracy. There's some kind of pressure on democracy. For example, in France, that only in the last 5 years, only 2/3 of the people still think that democracy is the way to go. And when you look at the youngsters, like under 35 years, by now, half of the youngsters think that it's perhaps time for another system, let's say a more autocratic system. And it's in that context that I have been thinking and working in Antwerp with lots of other people into trying to inject new belief in democracy. And 20 years ago, people started coming out in the streets. They started to demand public voice. They wanted to be more than voters. They wanted to be part of decision making. And in the same year, StRaten-generaal was started. And the initial initiative takers of StRaten-generaal, I was not part of that. I only joined it like 5 years later. The initial people made a very concise 4-letter word scheme in which they believed, and they wanted to have a focus on sustainable city making and in citizen involvement. And they said there's 4 words that are very important. You have to be able to have some resistance. You should study. You should know what you're talking about. You should network, and you should do some field work, go into the streets, mobilize, and whatever. And in 2005, that was the year I joined StRaten-generaal. The Flemish government had this idea of installing a new flyover and a new highway in Antwerp. You must know that in Antwerp, the ring road is not really a ring road, but it's like a 3/4 ring road. So there was this plan to make it a full circle, and that was going to be done by building a flyover with no less than 18 lanes in the middle of an urban structure. So we said this is not a very good idea. And you should also know that this whole new plan was going to involve the whole fabric of the whole city. So it was not just building this new flyover, but it was like taking out green zones, installing all kinds of flyovers everywhere in the city, adding noise, pollution. We said this is so much 1960s, this is a very bad idea. So we filed complaints. And then in 2008, a second citizen movement joined the cause, and they put the focus on health. Whereas StRaten-generaal put the focus on, let's say, citizen participation, urban planning, the more technical sides also. They said, we need to involve more people, and what are people concerned about? It's their health. So it's their lungs, basically. So they joined forces. And then in 2009, we had a referendum, and we won. So the citizen movements and the people of Antwerp, 59% said no to this whole plan. And we went on and on. We put forward visions for the future. We organized conferences on how to install new highways in a city. We looked at other cities, for example, to Madrid, Maastricht in the Netherlands, Hamburg. And we also, and next to this resistance, we also started networking more and more. We found out that there were a lot of movements in Antwerp that were occupied by these themes, but not very much occupied by the flyover discussion. And they joined forces. So at the center was still StRaten-generaal and Ademloos, but the others started to join forces. People came to the meetings. They integrated the discussion in their own works. We also came out into the streets. We organized information evenings, and easily 500 to 700 people came to those evenings. We did that like 3 times a year. And then in February 2014, a third player came next to StRaten-generaal and Ademloos, and it's called Ringland. And Ringland said, okay, this discussion about the flyover is very interesting, but we also should add a dream next to this technical discussion. And why not put a cover on the existing ring road? And actually, that was an old plan that was already 15 years or 10 years earlier. Other people in Antwerp put forward that plan. They said, why not put a cover on this noisy, polluting ring road that actually runs through the city? And they organized info meetings in several neighborhoods. They organized parties along that ring road to show people the potential. For example, this is one of those parties where right next to the highway, there's a lot of green, but nobody ever enters that green. And so illegally, we organized a party there and we looked at the highway, and especially we looked at the future cap. So in 2014, this dream was revisited, let's say, and Ringland said, why not put a ring road, a cap on the whole Antwerp ring road? And it was time of election. It was May 2014. So every day before election day, a flag was planted. And the idea was that every day another movement, another group, another school, another youth scouting team would put the flag. And the first day we had to look for people to come and plant the flag. And the last day, the 30th day, there was a long waiting list of people who still wanted to plant that flag. And then in May 2014, we organized Marching for the Cap, which is in Dutch, it's stappen om te overkappen. Stappen is walking, overkappen is putting a cap. And 10,000 people showed up on that very day. So the politicians saw that happening and they said, okay, something is happening in this city. And it went on and on. The day after that, Ringland presented its plans of putting a cap on the ring road. And twice, 2 evenings in a row, 2,300 people showed up to come and look at those plans. So in December 2015, the government said, okay, we have understood this signal. We still want to build something. We still have to solve the mobility problem on the highway level, but we're not sure how to do that. And we're gonna do it differently. So the Flemish government appointed a superintendent, and he had to bring together the several forces in the city. And he's a professor at MIT. He's Fleming. He's a professor at MIT, urban planning. So he had to involve his expertise, but also he had to bring together people and start up a participatory project. And so that happened. And then 1 year and a half later, we signed a covenant for the future with the Flemish government, who was going to pay most of the highway, with the city of Antwerp, and with so the three citizens movements who had built up, let's say, a historic role by that time. And this covenant of the future said, okay, we're going to put a cap on the ring. We're going to build this connection, but not with the flyover. We're going to make sure that the modal shift, so that means of the modal split of cars and the rest, that cars will be less, so that we need to work on a modal shift, so that in the whole region of Antwerp, which is the city of Antwerp and 31 other surrounding communities, the amount of cars will be not more than 50%. And nowadays it's 70%. So we still have to work on that. And there was all kinds of plans in that covenant for the future. And the government also put forward the first 1.25 billion euros for first segments of capping the ring road. So this covenant for the future is by now the most ambitious citizen participation experiment in Belgium. It has its roadmap towards 2030. We have established a working community. We have established a working platform for the agencies who are going to build the things. There's a regional board, which is the political level. And it's an ongoing experiment. So we're trying to develop new kinds of working structures, working communities. You see the schemes there. This is like, let's say, the latest version, but it's an ongoing process. And the important thing here is when you look at the red boxes to the right, the upper red box, that's like the pivot. That's the main axis around which everything works. So that's what we call the workbenches. And in the workbenches, those different projects are being developed. by different stakeholders that are cooperating. I'm going to talk about that later on. The blue boxes are, let's say, the policy, the political level, the administrations, and there is a Flemish structure, there is a city structure, there's a political steering committee, and we try to have a big jigsaw, a big puzzle in which everybody has his or her own role. So this is another way of putting this scheme forward. The 4 workbenches with putting the cap on the ring, or the smaller shift, for example. And very important, I think this is the most important slide probably, very important is that in those workbenches, at least 3 stakeholders come together all the time, which is the administration, experts, and citizens. And added are also the business community, where it's necessary or useful. In Antwerp, that's also including the Port of Antwerp, and also the public companies that basically are in between private and public companies, and they're usually building the projects. It's a long-term commitment. It's a deep process, so we're innovating on the way. And there's quite a lot of budgets made for this, also for the participation level. In those workbenches, which we call tussenruimtes, and that are in-between spaces, we need to have safe space. People are, you should have free speech. System world and the living world meet each other there. The top-down level and the bottom-up level meet each other there. As I said, the citizens, civil servants, and experts are like the backbone. It's an interdisciplinary way of approaching the wicked problems, the complex projects. There's a long-term vision, and there's a lot of out-of-the-box thinking. And people who participate need to show courage, they need to show creativity, and they need to be able to leave their comfort zones. So this is another slide of showing this working community as a missing link between the governments and the administrations. And in 2018, I wrote a book on democracy. And in that book, I'm also talking about those workbenches and what's the place in the bigger picture. I like to use the metaphor of the octopus. The octopus, when you look at the body of a human being, you have the head and you have the rest of the body. And we like to think top down. Everything happens in the brains, let's say. In an octopus, only 1/3 of the thinking happens in the brain, 2/3 happens in the 8 arms. And that's a nice metaphor for showing different ways of political citizenship beyond being a voter. And I like to make a difference between activism and citizen participation, as you see it there. And activism basically is out in the street, let's say, not in the procedures given by government, showing yourself, voicing concerns, putting something on the agenda, doing your field work. It's like, well, all successful citizens movements have created or have combined something of being a pioneer, something of being a dissident, and communicating, putting forward what you're thinking. And the governance challenge, as far as I'm concerned, is that all this energy, all this outside energy, the governments should do their utmost best to give space to citizens' involvement during and within policy making. So, and being a voter is one, but being a stakeholder, like in the workbenches, is another one, or like being a deliberator in a citizen panel, which is not a workbench, but which works in different ways. It's also a way of being involved, or being a voter in a referendum, like we did in Antwerp. And these are some pictures of how the workbench in Antwerp on putting a cap on the ring road works. So you see there's very open meetings. There are some like closed workshop sessions. There are settings in which we work like with interviews, like almost a radio show. There are ex cathedra sessions with local politicians, for example. And then in June 2018, we had the first results of Covenant for the Future, the first 18 CAP projects were being approved by the government, and this first 1.25 billion was invested. December 2018, there was a new local city council, and they have said we will call our new policy agreement, we will call it the Great Connection, and we want to have this Covenant for the Future being a backbone of our next 6 years and on the local level. And in the workbenches, we also organize what we call Scrum sessions, which means that within the workbench, we have a certain time, for example, 6 or 8 months, in which we work on very specific questions. For example, one part of the ring road that has to be designed. This is an example of a place where there's like a place between the port and the city. There's some water involved there. On your left, you see what were the plans in 2017. On your right, you see the final result of one of those Scrum sessions. The difference is big. This is another place, so you have the ring road with all kinds of spaghetti junctions. And then on your right, you see the result of the Scrum session, which took about a year to redesign that place. And so in those Scrum sessions, the citizens movements, individual citizens, agencies, civil servants, administrations, experts, also experts appointed by the citizens, they were all involved. This is the result of a Scrum session of another junction, because typically it is said about citizen participation that when it's a complex problem, then it's complex to involve citizens. It's okay to involve them on small scale things, but when you have to design a city, then it becomes complex. Well, I think in Antwerp, we have found a way, there's probably other ways as well, but we have a way to make sure that wicked complex projects also have heavily citizen participation. So on the left, you see what it's like now, this whole junction, and on the right, you see the result of very intensive talks and discussions and calculations. And to show you the level of detail of those Scrum sessions, this is a discussion about crossing a particular street, different alternatives. This is to show you that the traffic streams are being calculated very carefully for each alternative. This is different schemes as to connecting a tram line to a bridge. This is part of a discussion on green areas. So, and all these layers we put on top of each other. And I think in Antwerp, we have seen a very big turnaround from, let's say, activism outside in the street towards participation. So in 2013, I have written a book on standstill, a huge standstill. The discussion went everywhere and nowhere. And nowadays, the national television invites me, but also other stakeholders to come and explain it on television. We do joint communication with the Minister of Mobility. You see him second to the left, the Alderman of Mobility at City of Antwerp, and people from the citizen movements. We show the results to people who come and watch and are very enthusiastic. We go and tell our story to other cities. And last year, Antwerp has received the Eurocities 2019 Cooperation Award for this, what is basically a big experiment, this Covenant for the Future. And why not? My silent hope is that as to climate, that we can make many local climate covenants for the future with workbenches, Scrum sessions, and whatever.
Belgium is known to be a very multicultural and very diverse society. How does this work, this approach, also when you think about the very different communities that you have there, and how do you get different parties indeed involved in the way? Because as you said, these are quite complex issues and require almost like an education on itself to get into.
Yeah, we notice that in the administration there's already a lot of diversity, so that's a good point. The experts, that's a little bit more difficult, as there's a lot of academia and all kinds of ways that you have to cross, or thresholds you have to cross. And as to the citizens movements, we work on two levels, let's say. as I have told you, these are vast, complex discussions oftentimes. So what we noticed is that it's difficult to involve a very diverse, inclusive group in those kind of discussions. But to counter that, we have, for example, designed these Scrum sessions, or even on a more local level, when we're designing, there's a design team that gets that's in charge of this whole process, and they have to obtain charters from the local areas, and 30% of the points of their final design is this charter. So they have to go into the local area and sell the whole thing as we're making it. They also put up local offices in main local shopping streets to be visible. They have to go to local schools, to all kinds of groups that are active, to make sure that they get this charter. And when we've had 6 segments in which we have worked so far, 2 of the 6 design teams got a very negative charter. So, and that's a very interesting signal for all of us. So then we say, okay, we're not ready yet for finishing it or sending it to the political level. So back to the working table.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just kind of an ongoing democratic discussion. There is not.
It is.
It's in the process and not only in the